Thank you. Apparently I have 8 seconds to capture your attention, so I'm going to start by disagreeing with what you said, Pavlos. I'm very sorry about picking on you first, but you gave your example of Obama in the beginning and the Google search with 3 different people seeing different things in the Google search. And then you said something which is, we used to have a more or less common view of the world. I don't think so. No. I'm from Austria originally. 80 years ago, we had a civil war. I think in Greece, 70 years ago, you had a civil war. You had such a fundamentally different view of the world that people were willing to shoot their neighbors. So I think actually that is a fundamental misunderstanding of the history of how we communicate in society. And I think that you might have a point though, but I would call it the BBC parenthesis. Because I think many of us in the room here were young when the public service broadcaster was the dominant medium and the evening news was the main way that we learned about the world. So in the short parenthesis of maybe 30, 40 years, we might have had a more or less common view of the world to some extent. But even if you look at the political debates from the 1970s and terrorism and other things, I'm not sure that would be true either. And I think actually this is a good illustration of the risk that we have in the old media, because I think you were entirely representative of something that many of us think and hear every day, which is the sentiment that the world used to be a better place, and that's a sentiment that's usually expressed by aging white men. People like us, largely. Yeah? Apologies to the few women in the room. And it's people like us, aging white men, that put Trump in the White House and that achieved Brexit. So I think one of the first things we should do, we should get rid of this pessimistic view that everything is getting worse and that we're survival artists or whatever. No, we're a business, and what's totally normal in every business is that there's up cycles and down cycles, there's innovation cycles, and those who don't manage to innovate actually will die. And that's a fact. Now, how did we come to the place that we actually have to discuss whether media are dying or not? I think there's a couple of main mistakes that we as an industry have made. The first one is about 20 years ago, a new channel emerged, and at the time nobody was sure what would become of that channel. So many of us in the legacy media decided we're going to give away our product. Now, I've only been in this industry since 2013. Before that, I used to be at Dell Computers. I used to run Central Eastern Europe, including Greece. Imagine I would have had the brilliant idea to offer my computers for sale on the Dell website and to give them away for free at Plesio. It is obviously a stupid thing, right? I mean, Plesio would have liked it and they would have given me some money for it, but I would not have survived as a business. Now, neither can you in media. If you produce something that's of value, and let's assume that the reporting of intelligent, highly qualified people about difficult subjects is something of value, which I believe it is, then you cannot give it away. Now, of course, in the ad-supported business model, the story is somewhat different, but similar, because we used to be the only publishers, which meant that if you wanted to advertise, you had to come to us to make your product known. Now, in the new world, that is obviously not true anymore. Everybody can be a publisher in the new world. Daimler is a publisher in the new world. They think completely different about advertising now because they're putting a lot of money into what they call branded content, which is their own content that they produce and try to push out over the channels, as Yasser was describing. So even in the ad-supported models, the world is not the way it used to be 20 years ago, and the answer cannot be we continue as we used to. Now, the next mistake then made when the panic set in, 10 years ago or so, when people started to realize the internet is going to be big and we're losing a lot of subscriptions and advertising, panic set in, and then a lot of media companies, legacy media companies, developed cost-cutting as a strategy. Now, cost-cutting is not a strategy. And what happens is that in the media industry, the biggest cost bucket is editorial. So what happened is that a lot of legacy media started cutting editorial. Now, in any industry, if you start cutting the main production unit like that, you either have less quantity or less quality, or most likely both. And that is exactly what happened to a lot of legacy media. We kept cutting costs, we kept reducing the quantity and the quality of our product, but tried to sell it at the same, or most cases actually, at a higher price. Now that doesn't work either. Now the third fundamental mistake, so we gave away our product, and we cost cut as a strategy, and the third fundamental mistake is we actually had no idea who our customers were. We were actually not very interested in who our customers were. And I'm not going to give you any industry examples. I'm going to give you 2 examples from the previous panel. 2 quotes. The first quote was, somebody said on the panel here, readers are clients in a way. In a way? What does that mean? Readers are the reason why we exist. Readers and users and listeners and viewers are the reason why we exist. But the fact of the matter is we actually don't know a lot about our readers. We were sending, we were broadcasting, but we were not actually understanding what they were listening to, what they were grappling with, and how they wanted to react. Now, the second quote that I heard, which I loved, was at the previous panel, there were not 4, but even 7 speakers, and each of them had a 10-minute statement. And at the end of the panel, then, the moderator said, there are lots of things that we have discussed. No. If you had 7 statements of 10 minutes, nobody discussed anything. You had 7 people sending something for 10 minutes. There was no discussion that took place. But it, I think, is symptomatic of the way the media industry sees itself. That means if we say something, it must be very smart. We'll send it out to people and they will be willing to pay for it. And in the new world, and especially the new generation, is entirely about interaction. This, by the way, what we're doing here, I think is incredibly important. I love this kind of settings. I think live events are a major part of the future of the media industry. But we actually have to learn how to curate them, because honestly, I feel for you. Because sitting here and listening to 7 speakers for 10 minutes in a row is painful. This is not the best way to organize a conference. Now, we all know that. And it's hard for us, because we've been geared to sending, is how do we learn to interact with our audience, and how do we have a proper discussion with our audience that they will find worth paying for. Now, how are we trying to fix it? And that's the fourth and most problematic way in which, I think in a way in which we're trying to fix it. We're adopting a couple of coping mechanisms. The first coping mechanism is that we all say how terrible Google and Facebook are. Now, don't get me wrong, I think Google and Facebook have some significant problems, and I think there will have to be regulation for Google and Facebook and similar social media, which we can happily talk about if we have time left for question. But the fact of the matter is they're eating our advertising cake because they're better at providing to advertisers than what we do, which is an audience that they know is relevant. They're just better at what we're doing, so there is no point of trying to complain about that. We have to get better at that too. Now, the way we react often as media industry is we go to Brussels or we go to our national governments and we say 2 things. A, we would like you to subsidize us. Sounds familiar, right? And the second is we would like you to protect us. Protectionism. Now, there's currently a project in Brussels where we're going to invent a new form of copyright, which is called the publisher's right, so that publishers will have an ancillary revenue stream that they can get from Google and Facebook and the like. The problem with the publisher rights is if you actually do the calculation, which we had done in my old company, it's peanuts. In any scenario, it will be peanuts. But in exchange for that, we will have to give up other things because we're blowing away a lot of political capital in Brussels to get this publisher rights, which is useless. It's the typical problem of protectionism, which is we're trying to protect something that's dying instead of innovating into something that is new. Now, I think what do we actually have to do? I think, Yasser, there's not much that I can add to Yasser, which is we have to understand our audiences. We have to develop products that our audiences actually want. We have to really, really think hard about interaction, because interaction is the new form of communication. It's not about sending, it's not about broadcasting, it's about interaction. Now, what does that mean for our industry in all channels, online, even the offline channels, and of course, live and live events as well. And I think one final point I would like to make, a lot of companies, not just in the media industry, still have a position or are even creating positions called a chief digital officer. If a company has a position called the chief digital officer, I would sell their shares immediately. Because they simply haven't understood what this is about. You can't have an analog business and then you graft on a chief digital officer to do some stuff in digital. Everything that we do is multi-channel. And if it's not, we're going to fail.